I'm very excited for our second lockdown lunchtime. I've got my lunch lady tabard on and I'm ready to go. Let's start off. Hertford's moving markets. It's an interesting story. Our markets are part of our history as a town, and they haven't stayed still. So we'll kick off straight away by going back to the very, very beginning of Hertford. In around 912, 913 AD, King Edward raised 2 Saxon burghs here. Now, a burgh is just a term for a borough. There was the North Burgh and the South Burgh, and really the whole of the layout of Hertford is based on these Saxon burghs, and you'll really recognise the topography here in this beautiful drawing which was created by Philip Shield, one of our volunteers and supporters. In the North Burgh, the road coming in on the left is really the equivalent of St Andrew Street, and you can see that it's curving around Cowbridge at Old Cross. The South Burgh was centred around our current marketplace, and again you can sort of see the outline, the grid structure of Maidenhead Street, Fore Street, Bull Plain and what was Green Street. And these 2 burghs were really for several purposes. They helped protect London. It was the first sensible place that you could really cross the River Lee, and also for Edward they could act as a base for his advance on East Anglia against all the marauding Danes. So this is why they were created. But obviously once you've got people at a place, it attracts traders and markets spring up. So it really sort of started from around this point. But official markets have been held in Hertford from as early as the 13th century. What makes a market? We were fortunate enough to start getting royal charters for our markets from the 1300s onwards. A royal charter was really, really useful because it not only gave you permission to hold a market and collect rents from people who were using that market, but it prevented other places from having a market on the same day and acting in competition against your town. So anywhere within 7 miles was unable to hold a market on the same day as you. And this is really where the story of Hertford's rivalry with Ware starts to take off. Ware were in a slightly better position than Hertford in that they not only had the river, but they also had the main road coming from Colchester across to St Albans and the road north, Ermine Street. Whereas Hertford, we just really had the rivers, but we were perhaps a bit more pleased with ourselves than Ware at that time, because we were getting these royal charters. But Ware weren't going to sit quietly about it, and as trade carried on from both towns, Ware looked for ways to prevent Hertford being quite so successful. And at one point in the 1100s, they built a bridge on the river to prevent boats coming up here. And everybody in Hertford was incensed, and a rabble was raised and sent off and promptly demolished the bridge. Ware responded by building several weirs, and again, you know, there were repercussions, and that's really where the rivalry stemmed from, and it was a trade rivalry. But anyway, getting back to the market, in what constituted a market, we set up a Pai Pudra, which was basically a sort of little municipal bureaucracy for organising the market and making sure things were fair. So the Pai Pudra would fix the prices at the market so people couldn't dramatically undercut each other. They also appointed fish and flesh tasters who went around and made sure that the products on sale were of a sufficient quality, and they dealt with any petty offenders and fined people and that sort of thing. And in 1460 we got our market bell, and you can see it on display in the museum when we're allowed to open again, but this was made in Aldgate by a bell founder called John Daniel, and it hung outside the Bell Inn, which is now the Salisbury Arms Hotel. And if you walk past the Salisbury, you'll see that there is a plaque there acknowledging its former name, and it hung there because the market was in what is now today Marketplace, and opposite it was the town hall. Now, it was really important in terms of the bell. The market couldn't operate until the bell was rung, and the sounding of the bell let everybody know that the market was closed, and there were strict rules about when you could and couldn't trade. And so there's a notice from 1650 that says no higglers to be allowed to buy or sell before the bell was rung, and I'm guessing that's where the term haggling comes from, but who knows. But as I say, we had a town hall on the site of our current Shire Hall. This was built in 1627 and it lasted about 140 years. As you can see, it's quite a pretty building, but it was a timber building. And as the town became a bit more successful, that we needed something a bit more showbiz and that would impress visitors to the town and demonstrate what a great trading centre we actually were. So this town hall was demolished, and in 1767 Shire Hall was built. Now the image on the left, you can see on the west facade of the Shire Hall, there was a colonnaded section and there was a corn exchange held in that section. This photograph is from the 1970s, and you can see the full line of the colonnade there. There were some improvements made and renovations made to the Shire Hall in the late 1980s. The picture you can see on the left is as it looks today, but it's kept that spirit of the colonnade. So as well as the corn exchange under the Shire Hall, there was a butcher's market, and that lasted in fact until 1899, and the stairs you can see on the left of the photograph lead up to the main court area. So all of the market itself was still centred in this area around Marketplace, surrounding the Shire Hall, and it was becoming quite crowded. This is a wonderful painting in our collection by Thomas Rowlandson, and he was quite famous for his satirical paintings, usually of people in the upper stages of society, but he would focus on signs of corruption and poor behaviour, and they were meant to be humorous. And he visited Hartford several times, and he painted 3 paintings altogether in and around Hartford. But this one of the Marketplace is wonderful. You can see the Shire Hall on the right-hand side, and it really, the view hasn't changed that much. The Pageted building on the left still stands. Honey Lane at the back of the photograph, that's changed a little bit, but the viewpoint is still quite familiar to us. And what's wonderful with Rowlandson is, as I say, he puts a lot of detail in. So I thought we'd have a little closer look. Here on the left of the painting, you can see this parson holding forth to his captivated audience, and people are crushed together in the market. People are manhandling products. There are babies crying. It looks a very difficult place to negotiate. On the right-hand side, this chap here has fallen asleep on his sacks of corn, waiting outside the corn exchange. This chap's got a pig on a string rolling around, and again there are children putting their hands in everything, and people shouting and bustling and elbowing each other out of the way. And there would have been a lot of street crime going on as well. Market day would have been an ample opportunity for pickpocketing, so there was that to contend with. But as you can see, if we just quickly go back to the main image, the market has really swamped its area, and it's pushing out into 4th Street, and it's becoming quite difficult for people to get by. Now, between the sort of 18th to 19th centuries, there was a big explosion in population in Hartford, in that more people from London were coming, wealthy merchants from London were coming and buying estates in and around the town, and they didn't want to be tracking their carriages through these very, very difficult streets, and it was becoming a bit difficult to get about for the more well-off in society. So let's go back. So there were some ideas about what could be done with the market to make the town centre a bit more easy to negotiate. This is a really intriguing map. It was made by one of our museum founders, copied from a map that's held at the Hertfordshire Archives. And on here, you can see there is a site next to the Cross Keys Inn, which was on 4th Street, which had formerly been occupied by the jail. The jail had been there for a while, but it had a bit of a bad rep. It was associated with all the smallpox outbreaks in the town. People weren't crazy about having it right in the centre, and it was eventually moved up to Ware Road. But this site here seems to have been used for a short time as a market. It was erected with iron gates, it says, and it talks about temporary shambles. So these are rows of stalls. And as you can see, figure F down there, that's the Shire Hall. There's still stalls around it and in the middle of 4th Street. The person who originally drew this map has added dotted lines demonstrating where it's particularly difficult for your carriage to get past. But I don't think this market can have lasted a very long time, and I'd be very interested if anybody knows anything more about it. This is the only reference to it I can find, because eventually that site was used for the corn exchange. But let's think about animals. Originally, cows, sheep, pigs were all sold in the street in 4th Street. And after a bit, they started to be sold behind the Ram Inn on 4th Street in the yard there. It wasn't ideal. People, particularly as I mentioned, the town's demographic was changing. And so if you've got these smart London merchants inviting their smart friends to come and visit them, they don't really want to be driving their carriage through a street that's impeded by market stalls and covered in all kinds of mess from the animals and cows wandering around and getting in the way. So after a while, it was decided it should no longer be at the Ram Inn, and that they would re-site it a bit further down the road. On the corner of London Road was a pub called the Plough, and there was a field next to it where they thought it might be a good idea to have the cattle market. And this was decided in 1827, as you can see from this sign. So this is the Plough as it was. Eventually it was knocked down and rebuilt, and then knocked down again. But what's interesting in this photo, enticingly on the right-hand side are the beginnings of what I believe are the words poultry market. So I don't know exactly where this field was next to the Plough, but it's obviously somewhere around here, and the tradition of sort of livestock sales carried on. And here's another one where they're selling eggs, and you can see the Christ Hospital School Chapel on the left-hand side of the photograph on Ware Road there. Right, the Corn Exchange. So as I mentioned earlier, originally the Corn Exchange started life in the Shire Hall in the ground in the colonnade underneath, but by around the 1830s, Hertford's corn sales were absolutely booming. So you know, I don't know how Ware felt about that, but we were doing very, very well in terms of trade. So it was decided we needed a special Corn Exchange building, and the first building was constructed in 1840. That's the building you can see on the left-hand side, right next door to the Cross Keys Inn. On the side of it there, presumably supplanting this proposed market that had been there, replacing the jail. But we were doing so well that this building really wasn't grand enough, and so the new Corn Exchange was built in 1857, and this really told anybody coming into Hertford how successful we were in terms of trade. The goddess Ceres was placed on the pediment. She's the goddess of the harvest. There were urns, there were all kinds of whistles and bells attached to the front of the building, just to let everybody know what an important place Hertford was. And the markets continued to carry on around the marketplace. Here's the Rowlandson view again, but a bit later on. You know, this is probably 100 years later, but it hasn't changed that much. It's still the same view through to Honey Lane. It's still packed full of stalls and people. Because it was getting, again, once more impeding into the street, there were some thoughts about what could be done about the market. The Hartford Corporation wanted to come up with a solution. Cars weren't in the not too distant future. Carriages were going up and down the street. There were still animals rolling around. It wasn't an ideal situation on market day. So they decided that they could come up with a new solution in the covered market. Let's go back. Here is a plan for the covered market on Railway Street. It was the site behind the Corn Exchange, and it had formerly been occupied by a workhouse and a workhouse yard. The public house marked is the Duncombe Arms on Railway Street there. So it seemed a really good idea, put it behind the Corn Exchange, everything's sort of in the same place. And the advantage was that also that they could come up with some electric lighting in there for people. So it was a very modern, very exciting project. Not everybody was happy. You will never please everybody. The Mercury thought it was a wonderful idea in that the marketplace, the accommodation there had been of the most wretched and disagreeable kind, and this would protect the stallholders in all weathers. But others weren't as keen. They feared for the loss of their traditional market, and this bill that was posted anonymously around the town suggests. The covered market was built. And as you can see here, it stretched right from the back of the Corn Exchange onto the front of Railway Street. And I apologise for the quality of these photographs, but they're the only images we have of the interior of the covered market. And it just gives you an idea of how the stalls were laid out. Let's have a little think about the animals again. They're on the move. So they've moved to the Plough. They're now moving back to the Ram Inn on 4th Street. You can see this sales particular on the left-hand side. At one point, the Ram was changing hands, and it talks about stabling for 9 horses and a cattle market. That was 1898. This large photograph was taken by Peter Ruffles in the 60s, and it's the yard behind the Ram where the cattle were sold. So the cattle market's moved again. We've now got the covered market, but still the stalls are happening around the town, and they start moving into Bull Plain as well. And you can see this very busy scene. There's the museum at the back. People have got buggies and prams and barrows and baskets. And again, the market is filling the streets around the centre. One of the most important things to remember about Hertford Market was that it was also a source of entertainment. You didn't have to have any money. You could just wander around and take it all in. There was a fairground attitude to it. The sellers had to work hard to gain custom, so they put on performances. They attracted large crowds around them, and it was basically free entertainment, sort of variety performances going on for free just in the streets of Hertford. And a lot of people with whom we've recorded oral histories in the past have got very, very fond memories of it. Another thing to remember is that it didn't start in the same way that our markets do today, where the stallholders arrive very early and they finish about 4 o'clock. These were going on into the evening, and the stallholders had naphtha flares, so they were like paraffin lamps, which were slightly volatile, again adding to the theatricality of the event. Some lovely quotes here from the oral history collections. John Bunyan remembers the toffee man dramatically throwing it over a hook. Another man who sold shaving soap, putting it in his mouth and saying, if it's good enough for me to eat, it's good enough for you to shave with. People breaking out of chains. So you can imagine, particularly for children, it's a very, very exciting event going to the market. Here's another one from John Bunyan about the China King. Lots of people have referenced the China King. He would juggle the crockery. He would threaten to smash it. He would sometimes smash it if he felt he wasn't being offered a good enough price. Again, it was this sense of performance that people really, really enjoyed at the market. This photograph here is actually of Market Street. 2 cottages were demolished on 4th Street next to the Corn Exchange to create Market Street. You can see it leading down towards Green Street and what was the baker's, now Ruby Room, at the bottom of the slope there. And you can see again, the market is filling up the streets. It is absolutely chocker. So this starts to cause more problems again. In the 1930s, obviously there was a lot of unemployment, there was a depression, things were tough, and trade was down in Hartford as well. And it was a time of great change in the town. Birchley Green was being demolished. There were new ideas about what was best for the town centre. And there were strong opinions amongst the corporation councillors. Some people wanted to come up with the idea of having a new marketplace, moving it again, getting it out of the streets, stop blocking the streets. Traders were complaining that people couldn't get into their shops because the market stalls were blocking the ways. Cars were having difficulty negotiating the streets of Hertford. And again, on the corporation, there were very differing views. Councillor Keeble was very anti moving the market to another place. He said that trade is down and Hertford was doing nothing, and that other places their traders are supporting the market, and if they interfered with the Hertford market, then God help them. Alderman Wren countered with, that's your opinion. Ultimately, Alderman Wren and his sort of side of things won out, and it was decided that a new open-air market would be sited on Railway Street. The space had come about because of the demolition of Birchley Green, so there was a nice site on the front of Railway Street, not quite opposite the covered market, but close enough where it was said that the market could go and live, and that would clear out Market Street and Bull Plain and stop people blocking all of the roads. So on the very last night of Hertford Market, before the new open-air marketplace opened, there was a big night out in Hertford. People that perhaps hadn't visited the market for a while made the effort. And there's a lovely detail of it from the Hertfordshire Mercury. Merry music being played on loudspeakers, the lighting adding to the effect, and that people were hopeful for the future of our market. And this is the open-air market on Railway Street. This picture was taken in the early 1970s. The market crept back around the town. Here we are in the 70s, and we're back in Marketplace behind the Shire Hall, and it's still all happening. And it's still happening in Bull Plain. Again from the 1970s, the museum looking delightful in baby blue down there at the end of Bull Plain. And amongst the wonderful things you can buy at the market is some home brew if you are brave enough. But in Bull Plain, there was another sort of mini market almost, the arcade. Now, the arcade was cut through from Bull Plain to Green Street, and it was a little sort of shopping oasis connecting the 2 streets. And it also helped people avoid Railway Street, which at the time had a very narrow pavement, was busy with traffic, so it was a convenient cut through for shoppers. And most of the quotes we've got from people about the arcade relate to the 1970s, because there were music shops and fashions for slightly younger people. And this lovely one from Robbie Owen, it was where you could go to Jean's Junction and Sir's and buy your dreadful flared trousers. And you can see Sir's shop there on the left-hand side of this photo. And here's just another view of the arcade. So again, we have to go back to the cattle market. It's on the move again. So there were still problems with animals coming through the centre of town, and with the advent of cars and buses, this was becoming increasingly difficult. People started thinking about what they could do about it as early as 1906, but actually it was in the late 30s a scheme was dreamt up that perhaps the town corporation, as trustees of the museum, could buy the mission hall, which is Took House next door to the museum, move the museum into the mission hall, and a cattle market could be set up in the museum and the museum car park, which used to be behind us. But this didn't pan out. A lot of councillors were against it. Councillor Maskew thought it was incompatible to mix a museum with a cattle market and it would ruin the whole neighbourhood. And Councillor Wilson could not see how traffic and cattle would blend. And I'm with Councillor Wilson on that one. The site was a car park, and the thought of cows and pigs and cars trying to negotiate space there isn't a good one. It didn't pan out. The Cattle Commission said it was too small and it was going to cost too much to buy the mission hall and kit it out as a museum. So that put paid to that plan. But instead, a site was found at Paxton Hill for the cattle market, and it moved there after the Second World War. These are just some lovely quotes about animals running riot in the centre of town. I'm amused by the pig that it took them 3 hours to catch. Now, this is the cattle market at Paxton Hill. We've got some footage here. I'll just play you a couple of seconds of this. This was taken in the 1950s. It's a bit grainy, but here there's some cows being directed. There's an awful lot of scrap and toot, as I would call it, lying around. It wasn't just animals sold at the cattle market. They had auctions for all kinds of things, and that actually carried on until it closed. Some more cows on the move. We also have on our YouTube channel, you can see a clip of the last ever day of the cattle market at Paxton Hill. There's a clip from an hour-long video that we actually have in the museum collection, which charts the bar, the canteen, people gossiping, and all kinds of sales going on. And here was the cattle market on its last day, 1993. Cows come in, they come in the door under the big scale where you can see at the back there, they're weighed, everybody can see the weight for themselves, and then auctioned in the ring. And here's just a few more images of the cattle market. Bottom left, you can see the poultry sheds, hens, geese, ducks, they were all sold there. After the cattle market had closed, it didn't come back to Hertford, and we lost it in 1993. More things were going on in the town. The market was moving again. The 1970s was a time of big change in Hertford. New developments are virtually green again. And so the open air market that had been constructed on Railway Street now had to go. This is the site here. Also, there was a change for the covered market. This caused a huge amount of controversy. A public notice told people that the market was being converted to shops and offices. So people thought, okay, the building's still there, it's just going to be converted into something else. But that turned out not to be the case. The plan was always that the building would be demolished. Now, unfortunately, because of sort of woolly wording on the public notice, this caused huge problems for East Hertford District Council and for the people of Hertford. This lady pictured here, Judy Harrison, she put up a protest, she collected signatures, and she eventually went to the Ombudsman about what had happened to the covered market. But unfortunately, there was nothing that could be done. The council explained that contracts had been signed before people had protested, so there was nothing they could do about it. People should have complained before it had got to that point. But again, people felt they'd been misled because they didn't realise that the building was actually going to be demolished. 2 stallholders actually took East Herts Council to court and were awarded compensation. Eventually, the building was graffitied by protesters, what the Mercury called pro-covered marketeers, with slogans such as EHDC vandalism and democracy demolished. And here you can see as the building's being demolished and some of those slogans on there. The Art Society had tendered to use the building for their purposes, for exhibition and classes and what have you, and they felt very hard done by what had happened. They felt their tender hadn't been looked at properly, and so they and Julie Harrison went to the Ombudsman, and it took the Ombudsman about a year to come to a decision, but his report was that the council should have invited more tenders and had a responsibility to consider the interest of people who use the site regularly, but because it was not a listed building, they didn't need to refer to it in a press notice on planning permission. But having said that, the notice should have said that the new building was being erected on the land and the covered market would be demolished. So it was a bit of a wishy-washy report, and ultimately the building was lost and a lot of feelings were hurt in the process, and people felt that they were hard done by. But the markets continued. We are back on the Rowlandson scene in Marketplace, becoming increasingly familiar to us. The market's not quite as busy as in Rowlandson's time, but it is still definitely going. And it continued. These photographs are from the 1980s and 1990s. And again, the market explodes around the town: Bull Plain, Maidenhead Street, Birchley Street in the new Birchley Green shopping precinct. And it is still there today, and we hope it will continue. And once all of the new developments are currently taking place in our town, we hope the market will rise again and continue to give us our name as a market town. Several people, apart from Rowlandson, have also been inspired by Hertford markets. A couple of treats from our collection: Market Day by Trevor Chamberlain. Here you can see Railway Street and the open air market. And this one by Kathy Smell of Marketplace. The building on the right is Graveson's. Behind at the background, there's the White Hart, and you can see Railway Street going off on the left. I hope you've really enjoyed finding out about markets in Hertford. I've really enjoyed finding out about doing the research. And again, if you've got any questions, any queries, do email me. That's my email address. If you've enjoyed the talk and you'd like to make a donation to support the museum, please do go to our website and scroll down to the donate button. And if you'd like to see some more images of Hertford, go to our image library website, hertfordmuseumimages.org. So thank you all so much for sharing your lunchtime with me. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I will hopefully see you next week when we'll be looking at the Addis brushworks.